Hello, and welcome back to Uncultured Twenties. My name is Julia.
And my name is Leanne.
And this podcast is a journey of us culturally educating ourselves in what is considered classic in pop culture.
Yeah, media where people say, oh my god, you've never seen that, or you have to listen to that.
Films, music videos, albums, consumable content. We review it and why we think it's made its way into the canon.
Or why we think it shouldn't be.
We're always open to suggestions, so keep up with us at Uncultured Twenties on Instagram and TikTok. We're also on Letterboxd and Twitter at Uncultured Twenties.
This season, we're covering all things TIFF.
Today, we're taking a look at our first book, which has been adapted into a Netflix series this year and premiered at TIFF, All the Light We Cannot See. Uncultured Twenties.
I can't believe we're covering our first book. This is proof that we are, in fact, literate.
Yes. This was a lot more involved than just watching a movie. So
it's definitely been a long time coming. And okay, I'm admitting I'm not fully done the book. Okay.
Oh,
I know.
You're gonna get some spoilers.
It's okay. I have this really bad habit where when I read a book, I read the last page first.
Okay, I do that, but I read the last sentence only.
Okay.
Because I'm like, the last page is too much, so I just do the last sentence. Why is that a thing? Like, why do we...
I don't know.
I just need to know what I'm getting into. Like, I don't know.
For some people, it ruins the experience because they want to be surprised. But for me, like, I just get so much anxiety not knowing what's going to happen next that I have to, like, have some idea. And it doesn't ruin the experience for me because then I'm like, oh, I wonder how they get there. Or like,
I guess, yeah.
You know, most of the time you don't know who the characters are or something. So it's just something that I've always done. Like, since I was a kid, I always like to read the last page first.
Yeah, I feel like with the last sentence, I like can't stop myself. Like, it's also too much of a ritual at this point for me that every time I get a book, I'm like, well, now I just have to read the last sentence. Like,
I like that though, just the last sentence. Like, I can't stop myself from looking up like the rest of the page.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't want to spoil it for myself, I guess. And I know it's not like full spoilers, but I just know that I'm going to be thinking about it while I'm reading the book and be like, oh my God, remember on the last page when, like, you know, they walked into the sunset or whatever. Like, I don't know. So the last sentence is just a little snippet for me. It's just enough to keep me satisfied, I guess. I
think I have maybe 100-ish pages left. So I'm like about 3/4 of the way through the book. Like I'm a good chunk in. I just like I've been having a hard time reading. I can read. I just my attention span and okay, with this book is actually like almost, it's a perfect example of the struggle I've had with reading over the past few years. Okay. I've always been a big reader. Like, when I was a kid, I would literally, because I had so much anxiety, like I hated talking to strangers, I would go everywhere with a book. I would have my hand on the back of my mom, like I would hold on to her. And when we were walking places, I would just read and just follow her. Like, I wouldn't even look where I was going. I would just use her as like a guide and just read. And I remember I went to baseball games with my dad and I would just read the whole game. And then people would be like, oh, what are you reading? Like, blah, blah. I'd be like, a book. Like, I just love to read. I mean, I still love to read, but I was like, I loved it. You know how, you know those kids. I mean, I'm sure you
I
were
was
one
also
of them
that
too,
kid. Yeah.
Or like every holiday you got like a Chapters gift card or a book or something. And like I was always at the library renting out books. So they were really like my safe space and I really love to read. But you know how it gets when you're like, when it becomes less socially acceptable to read young adult novels that are fun and adventurous. And now you have to read adult books that are about serious topics. And they're not as much as an escape as it makes you like analyze your own life and the world. And then you're just like, oh, like I don't enjoy reading about like serious topics. Yeah. So, and also once we started university, I mean, we're already reading so much that I'm like, I
can't read anymore. Yeah.
I remember being like, why is it taking me an hour to read 4 pages?
I know. I used to go through like 200 pages like in an hour. Like, I'm like, I used to be crazy. Now I'm like, Yeah.
Well, that was when the language was like simple. You could understand it. I remember
True.
just reading over a sentence like a million times. I'm like, I have no idea what this means. Like academic language is honestly such a barrier.
I agree. Yeah. I'm like, it makes it so much. I feel like a lot of times they're just trying to make themselves sound smart.
I agree. So basically, the story with this book, my grandma gets me a book almost like every single year for Christmas or my birthday or whatever. My grandma got me this book maybe 2016, 2017, a few years after it was published, when there was like a lot of hype around it. It was like a New York Times bestseller. It sold like over 15 million copies. Like it got the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, like all of that good stuff. So it was really like, it was like one of those books that I think when you walk into Indigo, they just have like a million copies there, and I'm sure a bunch of people got them as a holiday gift because they're like, oh, this is like best book of the year, you know?
Yep.
So I remember trying to read it, and just, I remember it was one of those books where you bring it on the subway and you carry it with you for like a year and you never ever read it.
Yeah.
Like I would try and I just never ever got past the first like few pages. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think like it was just not at a time where I was wanting to read about something like this. You know, it wasn't when I was interested. I mean, I'm still not really interested in war, but
yeah.
I also don't even think I really knew the premise. You know, now looking at it, I went to school for radio broadcasting. So obviously this is something that I would now be more interested in.
Mm-hmm.
We'll explain why in the synopsis. And I remember trying to read it so many times because I'm like, my grandma got me this book. I really want to get into it. And I just never did.
Yep.
Yeah. Have you like heard about this book before we started reading it, or did you just kind of go into it blind?
I had not heard about this book, so this was brand new for me. Leanne got me my copy from the thrift store. But when I started reading it, my mom was like, "Oh my God, I loved that book. It was such an amazing book." And I'm like, "Oh, you never said anything. Like I never heard about it." But yeah, I totally get that, like bringing it on the subway and like never actually reading it. Like I've done that with so many books. And yeah, when I started reading it too, it's something that like I feel like reading nowadays is like I have to like force myself to get past the beginning of it to actually get into a book. And then I do enjoy it, of course, once I'm like in it. But just actually sitting down and being like, okay, I'm going to dedicate this time to reading, and I have to get into a new book and I have to learn the new characters and invest myself. It is like a whole chore sometimes. And I'm also the type of person who likes to do multiple things at once. So like I just remember in university too, I'm like, I wish I could listen to music and read at the same time.
Is that something that's too distracting for you?
Yeah, because if I'm listening to like the lyrics of the music, but then also trying to like absorb what's happening, I can't. I don't know. When I'm reading, I have to be like fully invested and like concentrated on it. Otherwise, I just find myself going back and being like, I didn't absorb any of that, and going back to the top of the page.
Yeah, like
and
just
going,
reading the same page.
Yeah, and being like,
over
okay,
again.
I still didn't absorb it. Go back and read again. So, and now I like to crochet or knit while I do stuff. So I'm like, I need to like look at what I'm doing. Maybe when I'm like an advanced crocheter and I don't need to watch my hands while they're doing stuff, maybe I'll be able to like just prop up my book and read. But it is like you have to like for me at least, you have to dedicate yourself to it completely, and I'm just like, that's like not how I function anymore. But yeah, when I was a kid, I used to love reading, and like we used to have we had a bedtime, but we could extend our bedtime by half an hour if we were reading for that half an hour.
Period.
So I was like, well, obviously I'm going to stay up later and get to read because I love to read. But it's, yeah, those were different times.
I remember, you know, I would even like hold like a flashlight and read under the covers because I was like, I want to finish reading.
Yeah.
And I also used to be able to like read in the car. And so we would go on like, you know, road trips to go see my grandparents or, you know, wherever. And I would read so much in the car. Mm-hmm. Now, like, I get car sick.
I was always motion sick. I was jealous of like my brother would be reading and I'd be like, I wish I could read. Or like I would try to read a couple chapters and then I'd be like, okay, I need to take a break for like half an hour and then I'll come back. And you're like trying to read like at nighttime because your dad yells at you not to turn on the light, and you're trying to read every time you go under like a street light.
Yes.
And I'm like, and then she went to the, and then she walked by this, and I'm just you're like going at each street light.
I like that this is a universal experience.
Yeah. I'm like, please, can I just turn on the light for a second so I can finish this chapter? And he's like, absolutely not. Now I'm driving the car and I'm like, it's fine. Like, I'm like, you could turn the light on. I'll survive.
I don't know what their thought process was behind that. Yeah, I mean, getting older, I guess this is part of being uncultured 20s, is just learning what your body can no longer do and what your brain can no longer do.
Yeah.
I also need to I like to do multiple things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for me to just sit down and just read, and just sit still.
Mm-hmm.
I tried getting into audiobooks because, I like listening to podcasts. I mean, we make a podcast, so.
Yep.
But audiobooks are just...
the voices of the people reading them.
It takes me out.
I can't do it.
Me too.
Yeah.
That's the exact same
Because in my
thing.
head, I'm like, I read it in my head how I would imagine it would be. And so when it's just this one, like, recently, I was on a road trip and my cousin was listening to an audiobook and it was Harry Potter, so I've already read it. But it was just this like old British guy saying it, and I was like kind of half listening, and I'm like, I just can't, like, he's being like Hermione, he's like, Hermione said blah blah blah, and I'm like, I just can't get into it. Like, I don't know, something about it's just too much for me.
Okay, I listened to the Twilight audiobook last year.
Oh my god.
But it just, obviously it's a different kind of production, but I wish they had different voice actors for different characters, because this actress, first of all, she sounds like she's 45, not 17-year-old Bella Swan. Yeah. And then she's talking like this for Edward. No. And like this for... I'm like, stop. This is taking me out. Yeah. I can't do it. The only kind of audiobook that I enjoy listening to is an autobiography.
I was going to say.
Where it's the author who actually wrote the book talking about their own life. Yeah. That's the only kind of audiobook that I enjoy. Yeah. Anyways, so that is the prelude to All the Light We Cannot See. I have not finished it. First, we're going to talk about the book, which Julia has completed.
Yes, I did.
Speedy reader. And then we're going to talk about the adaptation. Yes. So this is the TIFF element. Yeah, they turned it in. Well, initially we both thought it was a movie. I don't know. Everybody who was going into it all thought it was a movie. I went with Jenna, previous guest of the podcast. Nice. And we both expected it to be a film, and then lo and behold, it's a TV show. So I don't know if there was a miscommunication on our part. Not a big deal. I just was like, oh, I thought I was going to be watching the whole thing, not a Netflix episode. But, I'm okay with it because I believe it's a limited series. So it's not one of those shows where they start it based on the book and then they're just going to have to extend it and make up stuff past the written material, which I always find the quality obviously downgrades. They screened the first 2 episodes and it's directed by Shawn Levy. Have to mention this because he has directed some of my favorite films like Night at the Museum and Cheaper by the Dozen. And this year he was actually the recipient of the Norman Jewison Award for Career Achievement at the TIFF Tribute Awards. So it was kind of his year for that, Canadian year. It's interesting to watch his work in a different light because obviously his previous films are very family-friendly comedy films, and this is a much more serious endeavor. So I'm excited to get started. We'll talk about the book first, and then we'll get into the series.
Let's get into it. Synopsis. Spoilers ahead.
All the Light We Cannot See follows the stories of Marie-Laure Leblanc. This is going to be interesting with my French and German. Just warning y'all in advance. She is a young girl living in Paris, and the other character is Warner Fenning?
I think so, yeah.
Who lives in an orphanage in Germany. The novel alternates between their perspectives as well as different years in their lives, so it takes place over the general course of World War II.
Before the war, Marie-Laure lives with her father, who is a locksmith at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. Due to cataracts, she becomes blind at a young age, And so her father ends up building her a miniature model of the town where they live. And basically he tells her, like, learn the model with your hands and then you'll be able to navigate the streets by yourself. As rumors and threat of German occupation make their way to France, Marie-Laure's father, along with some other members of the museum, are entrusted with a diamond or replicas of a diamond known as the Sea of Flames. None of the members who are given these diamonds or replicas know who has the real diamond, and essentially the myth of the diamond is that it was created by a goddess who gifted it to her lover, who's the god of the sea, and then he cursed it once it was stolen by a prince. And the curse goes that whoever carries the diamond will be safe from all danger, but everyone around them and everyone they love will suffer. Marie-Laure and her father end up fleeing Paris.
The scene where they flee Paris, they talk about how she walked so long, her feet were bleeding, like they were turned away from the train. It sounded so brutal. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That scene really like stuck with me in the book.
For sure.
In Germany, Werner lives with his sister Jutta in an orphanage in a mining town. He finds a broken radio and repairs it, and he and his sister use it to listen to a French professor broadcast about science. It's very clear that Werner is gifted in science and technology, but once he's 15, he will be sent to work in the coal mines along with all the other orphans. And this is also the coal mine where their father was killed. But he kind of becomes known as this like radio repairman, so he's brought to repair a Nazi official's radio and then is offered a place at this Nazi school called Schulpforta, and to get in he has to go through this series of like physical and intellectual tests, obviously very eugenic standards to get into the school.
Marie-Laure and her father discover that the man they were supposed to deliver the diamond to has fled to London, so they end up continuing on to the town of Saint-Malo, where Marie-Laure's recluse great-uncle Etienne and his housekeeper Madame Manec live. This ends up becoming their new home. They live with them, and Marie-Laure's father builds her a model of this town as well, so she can do the same thing, learn the streets, and learn how to get around. As German occupation moves in, all radios are confiscated, but Etienne keeps one secretly upstairs in the attic of his like 6-story house. So they're like, they probably won't find it up in the 6-story attic.
Yeah, their house, and honestly the whole town sounds so beautiful. It's like this walled seaside city, like, and the house, you know, the housekeeper has a floor, he has a floor that's like a secret attic. Like, it just sounds like, I mean, obviously it's in awful circumstances, but it sounds like a really lovely place to be.
Marie-Laure's father is asked kind of suspiciously to return to the museum, and instead is arrested on the way and ends up being sent to a labor camp in Germany.
Meanwhile, Werner heads to the school Schulpforta, where he befriends Frederick, a very gentle boy who is obsessed with birds. He is really well off, and Werner actually like visits him at his home, and he's like, wow, this is how you're living. Okay. Werner is quickly singled out for his success in mathematics and science and is set to work on a specific project for finding the location of radio broadcasts. He's also given treats and sort of secret.
He gets some perks
Because he's working on this advanced project. Meanwhile, Frederick is singled out for his weakness, and one night he's beaten so badly that he is sent home with permanent brain damage.
That was such a sad moment in the book. And Werner's just like, he just can't do anything about it, but like, could he have done something about it? And, you know, he just loves birds, and now he like doesn't even recognize like anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of scenes where, you know, you just feel the helplessness. Like, this is a 15-year-old boy, and like they're being told to torture, like beat each other up.
In Saint-Malo, Madame Manec and a group of other women in town start to organize to fight against the Nazis by passing along information to benefit the Allies. Etienne originally refuses when he is asked to help, but then Madame dies because of pneumonia. And so Etienne and Marie-Laure take up the mantle and continue where she left off. Marie-Laure walks to the bakery every day, where she receives a loaf of bread, and inside it is baked a slip of paper that contains Allied intelligence. And then Etienne will broadcast that on his secret radio up in the attic. And unfortunately, one day, Etienne is out past curfew doing one of one of the missions he was assigned, I believe it was to help triangulate where some like weapons are. And then he is arrested, and so blind Marie-Laure is left alone in the house, and she doesn't know what happened to him.
I think this is about where I have read up to.
Okay.
So this is as much of a surprise as it is to y'all who are listening. But I do remember, I loved, like, the Madame Manek's character was so lovely. Really, really good character.
Yeah, she was like a stand-in mother figure, I feel like, for Marie-Laure.
Yeah, and she was like really, you know, she like organizes this whole group of old ladies who are secretly fighting against the Nazis. They're like doing secret little things just to like ruin their day, and like ultimately a little rebellion. And I loved that it was just like all the little madames like getting together in the kitchen and like baking things and like fighting against the Nazis. It was awesome. Back at the school, Werner notices that all the professors and everybody's getting sent out, and they're being replaced with like all these veterans, and like, you know, you can kind of see hints that they're starting to lose. And they're still getting all these broadcasts saying like, oh, we're doing great in Russia. Like we're like basically all this propaganda lying to them, saying that they're doing well, when in fact, you know, reading it from our perspective, we know that things are starting to look bad for them. And he's only 16 at this point, but they say, oh, we made a mistake with your paperwork. Yeah. Turns out you're actually 18. Go fight. And that's a lie, but he's sent to the army, and he joins a team who locates anti-German radio broadcasts and kills the broadcasters using the technology he helped create. I did read this part, you know, where they like killed the girl who was like on the swing. Oh, it was awful.
Yeah.
Eventually, they are called to locate a broadcast in the town of Saint Malo. However, once they arrive, Werner recognizes the broadcaster as the French professor he and his sister used to listen to back in the orphanage. It turns out to be Etienne's deceased brother, or Marie-Laure's grandfather, I believe. Etienne and Marie-Laure are playing the like old tapes, like on repeat. So because of this fond memory, Werner lies to his team and instead goes by himself to find the source. And on the way, he does happen to see Marie-Laure going to and from the bakery.
As the bombing begins in Saint-Malo, Werner becomes trapped under the rubble inside the basement of a hotel. The Hotel of Bees, it was called, because it just had bees, like bee decorations everywhere. Marie-Laure hides in the attic of her house, and then throughout this book, there's been this character, Von Rumpel, who is trying to track down the Sea of Flames, the real Sea of Flames, and he ends up going through each person who has the replica and finally discovers that it was Marie-Laure's dad who had the real diamond. And so finally at this moment, you know, when everything's being bombed, like amidst all the chaos, he finds her house. And so she hears him enter the house downstairs. And the reason that he's been searching for the Sea of Flames is because he's just trusting and believing in the myth, or the legend, I guess, that whoever holds the diamond is safe. And he's been suffering from a terminal illness, and he's basically near the end of his life. And he's like, if I get this diamond, then it'll save me. I guess it's like his final like hope is that this will save him.
Marie-Laure's dad sent her a letter from the concentration camp, I believe, and sort of in the letter it hinted that she needed to look like inside the house twice. Inside
the house. And so then that's when we find that the Sea of Flames was hidden inside the little miniature model of Etienne's house that he had built for her. And so after days of hiding in the attic, reaching the end of what little food and water she has, Marie-Laure begins to broadcast herself reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was a gift originally from her father that she had lost, and it was like a giant braille version of the book. And then Etienne had gifted her one on her birthday. And, you know, it's kind of just like she's feeling like this is the end anyways. I'm just going to start broadcasting. And, you know, if he hears me downstairs, then he hears me downstairs.
Meanwhile, in the hotel basement, Werner manages to fix his radio, and he hears Marie-Laure broadcasting. She finally gives up her hiding and broadcasts loud music over the radio. And she's like, well, he's here, alerting Werner that she is in danger. He risks his life by blasting a hole to get out of the hotel and is able to escape to Etienne's house. He kills Von Rumpel and saves Marie-Laure, and then helps her escape the city. She gives him the model with the Sea of Flames inside, and then they part ways. Marie-Laure is eventually reunited with Etienne and they return to Paris, while Werner is taken prisoner by the Allies. In a state of delirium, he wanders into a minefield, triggers an explosion, and is killed.
Dun dun dun. Did you know that before
I
reading
didn't
the
know that.
summary?
I didn't know that.
Big spoiler. Yeah, he's sort of like after they in one of their, as we mentioned, in one of their like radio broadcast trips, they end up killing like an innocent young girl, and he's sort of haunted by her, like he like keeps seeing her ghost or whatever, and so that's sort of the start of like he's like kind of breaking down a little bit. And so after everything, and after like, yeah, they break out of they bust out of the hotel with like a grenade and all this stuff. He's like in a hospital, like he could have been fine too, which is why it's so devastating. Like he was captured, but he's being treated, and they're like, you can defect, so like he wouldn't have been like tried or anything. But he's just so like overcome by everything that he just gets up out of his bed and wanders into a minefield. And they're yelling like, don't go, like there's mines there, and he's just like so out of it that yeah, he ends up dying. So years later, Werner's sister Jetta is given his belongings, and it includes the model house of Etienne's house. She ends up finding the connection to Marie-Laure and meets with her and gives the model house back to her. And so when Marie-Laure opens it, inside she finds the key to a gate to this ocean grotto that she used to visit, and where she ended up giving Werner the model and the diamond. And then we learn that because the key is inside there instead of the diamond, that Werner ended up returning the diamond to the ocean. And so the curse, whatever, is over.
Hopefully it will never affect anybody again.
The god of the sea gets his diamond back. Nobody needs to be cursed. And then that's sort of where it ends.
Damn, we just did it. Our first book on the podcast.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, that was, yeah. It was very, like, a very, like, serious book to read. But it's good to, like, get back into reading. Like, you know, at the beginning of the year, I was really reading a lot. And I'm very excited to finish this book. Not because I want it to be over, just excited to, like, okay, I finally finished this book that I've been meaning to read for years.
Yeah, I'll be honest, like, after reading this book, I kind of went back to doing what I used to do when I was little, where I'd be like, okay, I'm going to read before I go to bed. So, like, I don't feel like I have other things to do. Like, I'm just going to bed. Instead, I'm just going to read for, like, a half hour or whatever. And I'm still doing it. And I'm like, this is great. Like, I feel like I'm a kid again. And I'm just, like, have my bedtime. But I get to, like, sneak past my bedtime a little bit because I can read. And I regret it sometimes in the morning because then I'm exhausted and like now I have a job and stuff. So like it's not like when I was a kid and I could just do whatever. But yeah, I have been reading since then. I finished finally this giant book that I've been reading for like 2 years. I'm halfway through my next book and I'm like, wow, doing a book for the podcast made me start reading again. So I'm like, this is great.
Well, you know, I went and took out another book from the library to inspire me to finish this one.
Oh, nice.
It's Jeanette McCurdy's book. Yeah. I'm glad my mom died.
Yeah, that is actually an audiobook. I was listening to it in like parts on TikTok, and I'm like, that sounds like an audiobook that I would actually listen to.
Yeah.
So there were parts of this book that I actually found made it easier for me to get into it. So one of them was the short chapters. And so when I would be reading before bed, I would be like, oh, okay, I can read like 5 more chapters and then that'll be good. So I thought it was like, I actually thought it kept me interested also because they were flipping back and forth. Like every other chapter was Werner or Marie. And so I would be like, get to the end of this chapter and I'd be like, what's going to happen next to Marie? And then I'd be like, oh, well, I have to read Werner's part first and then I'll get to Marie. So I thought that was a really creative way of writing that made me stay interested in the book. And then also the use of jumping around in time, like when you first start off with that first chapter and it's just like she receives a flyer but she can't read it because she's blind and they're about to bomb the town and you're like, oh my god, like what's gonna happen? And so I thought that was also creative, the way they were flipping back and forth between August of 1944 when the bombing was happening and then just sort of giving you all the context leading up to that. I think we talked about that in like Pulp Fiction too, the movie, how that was like sort of a creative way and keeps you engaged in the story as well because you're like, oh my gosh, how did we get to this point? And maybe it's the same as like
almost like reading the end of the book first.
It's like same idea. So I also thought that was like a interesting way of storytelling that kept me engaged in the book otherwise. Not that I wouldn't have been otherwise, but
I'm glad to like have your perspective on that, because I find those things actually make it harder for me personally.
okay.
So it's good to know that, like, you know, like people like it like that, because for me, I guess where you're like, oh, I have to read the next one to get there, I'm like, oh, they switched it, I'm just gonna wait and read this tomorrow, because like it's like a new story and I don't want to get into it. Right. And then I just sometimes I have a hard time keeping track of like when things are happening. So when they're jumping around, I really have a hard time doing that. So I think that might have been a little bit of a barrier for me, because like I prefer longer chapters where like I get into it and like I really like get immersed, whereas when it breaks up so much, I'm like, oh, okay, like it's just harder for me to get immersed. But I do think it's like really creative. I think you're right, it does, starting with like such a intriguing scene really does like start the reader off like, oh my gosh, like this is like, what is this, what's happening? It really draws you in. So I think it's an interesting way of storytelling. I think it was easier for me in the film, actually, or sorry, the series, the film, yes. the adaptation, because they also did some time jumps, but because visually you can see, oh, they're older, they're younger, like different actors, you can see where they are. It helped me be like, oh, okay, this is like when they're younger, this is before.
The other thing that I guess I liked was how the author integrated the story of the Sea of Flames and sort of runs parallel to their story as well, because they introduce it in one of the earlier chapters of like, they're like inside of a box, like in the museum there might be a diamond, and here's the whole story and the curse. And you know, you find Marie Laure is like, is it because of this curse? Like she has a moment where she's like, is it because of this curse that like my father was arrested, Etienne was arrested, Madame died, like all these things are happening? And it's like, you know, as like the outside viewer, it's like, oh no, it was just like, it's just war, like it's just like the chaos of war and everything there. But it was like sort of like it's not like a relief, but it's sort of like gives you this like fantastical sort of image going through that helps while you're just also reading about everybody is dying and like war is awful. So I thought I liked that was a little story that they sort of carried through there.
Yeah, and now I can't remember if this was the book or the show, but like I think they kind of insinuate that Marie Laure is blind because her dad was working with the Sea of Flames and her mother died because of the Sea of Flames. So it sort of alludes to not just the war, but even before it happened, because her dad is the one who built the safe for the Sea of Flames. I also really liked that storyline. I kind of wish there was a little bit more on it, but I think at first I didn't like the like storyline with the guy who's looking for it. I was like, okay, there's like too much going on. But like as we got into it and you could like feel his desperation, and like there's a scene where he goes to their old apartment in Paris and he sees like the apartment as they left it, like in a hurry before they ran for the war. And I really liked seeing him see their apartment in a different perspective. And he's like going through chemo and just tracking these people down one by one. I really liked that storyline. I thought that was really interesting. And I always love a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of mystery in my books.
Give me a little something in there,
yeah. So I think with the series, I'm definitely gonna finish it. I believe there's only like 4 episodes, so it's like a nice it's like an hour an episode, so it's like a nice compact series. That's how I like it. You can tell it's a Netflix series. You can tell they put a ton of money into it. Okay. The filming, the quality, it's like next level. It looks really, really beautiful. So I don't know, maybe I was kind of surprised because I was like, you know, obviously it won a prize and everything, but I was like, this isn't a book that I imagine like a ton of people are going to be like waiting for the adaptation. Yeah. Like, I feel like the people who like this kind of book are people who prefer reading over films or shows. So I thought that was interesting, but you know, who knows? Like when I went to the premiere with Jenna, there were so many like older people there going to see it, so I thought that was really cute. I was like, I would have loved to take my grandma to this premiere and show it to her, but I'm gonna actually maybe try to watch it with her next time I see her. That would be fun. But yeah, I don't know how I felt about it. I think I really helped, having, because at the point I had read some of the book, and I think because I watched the first two, I was like, oh, I'm gonna spoil it, but it actually ended like right where I had finished reading at the time, so it was sort of like a perfect timing situation. I don't know. Okay, Mark Ruffalo is in it.
Yes, he
plays the dad. I love Mark Ruffalo, but I did not like him. Okay. He just like, he has this like fake French accent that just sounds awful. Right. And also, Jenna and I both talked about this, and we agreed that it was weird that the whole thing was in English.
Okay.
Because
sorry to interrupt. I was thinking, because I've watched the trailers. They released one like back before, and then they released one like 3 weeks ago. And so in the first one, there's no talking. It's all just like dramatic music, whatever, and like the scenes. But then she has a British accent.
Yes.
I was like, why? Like, I'm like,
it doesn't.
And he has like a German accent.
They just speak in like a vague accent. Yeah, but they speak in English.
I'm like, I understand like sometimes, and I feel like a lot of films do this. A lot of like British films do this, where they're like making the film like about another country, like it's in another country or something, where like the actor is just speaking in a British accent, and I'm like, this is so random. Like, I'm like, why? Like, you couldn't, like, even if you're speaking in English, like, could you do like a little something to like make me believe a little more? Like, I'm like, I'm trying to believe that this is like a little blind French girl.
Yeah.
And it's like she's speaking in a British accent, but films do this all the time, and I'm like, why? I'm like, it's so weird.
Like, is the barrier of subtitles really that big? Like, to me, it's not. Yeah. I like, especially, okay, I can forgive Marie-Laure and her dad speaking English, because I would say they're more the main character.
Yeah.
At least in the series. But it does not make sense to have all these Nazis speaking English. It just doesn't. Like, it takes me out of it. I'm like, why? Like, it just doesn't, it really, really irked me. I thought they should have done it in the different languages, also just to show the difference between the two sides of the story, like the French versus the Germans. And also, Warner grows up in like a French speaking orphanage, right? Like, or the head lady of the orphanage speaks French, so there's like a whole storyline of, not a storyline, but like it's definitely a part of the story where he also speaks French, and like it just really took me out of the whole historical context of the book. Just listening to them speak in English, and they all like had different accents. Like Mark Ruffalo had a different accent than Marie-Laure.
Well, it's funny that Mark Ruffalo's doing a French accent, but then the other actress is like a British accent.
Well, I don't even know if his was like, he's like, I can't even imitate it. But I'm like, first of all, I'm like, okay, this is Mark Ruffalo. Like, this is not some French locksmith. Yeah. And he's trying too hard to be like really whimsical.
Right.
Like, he tries to bring a lot of whimsy to the character. It's giving like Timothée Chalamet in Wonka.
Right.
Like, just so forced and so like kind of just creepy.
Okay.
And I don't think of Mark Ruffalo as a creepy guy. It starts off with the same scene, and the beginning was beautiful. It was so beautiful, where Marie-Laure is like in the attic, and there's papers going everywhere, and she's like just grabbing them, and she doesn't know what they say, but like you, the audience, can see it. And the actress, when she comes down and she's speaking into the broadcast, like the main actress, her performance is really good. And I believe she's actually one of the TIFF like rising stars this year. She's like very much like up and coming. She's beautiful. Her acting was really good, and like that beginning scene was really good. And there are some like good scenes with Werner when he's in the Hotel of Bees. But yeah, like I think the first two episodes were very much setting everything up for the rest of the story. Right. So we didn't really get into like Madame Manette or really like living in Saint Malo. It was more just their background story, getting there. The theme was really good. It was like going in the model of the house, like that.
Oh, cool.
That Marie-Laure's dad had built. So it was very cool, like setting where it's like an I Spy.
Netflix always does like crazy theme intros, I feel like.
Definitely like very Netflix brand theme intro.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm definitely going to be watching it, especially with it coming out so soon. It's coming out November 2nd, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very soon. I guess I'll be watching it, and I'm telling myself, you better be on the book by the time it's coming out.
You can do it. You're almost there.
Yeah. Are you going to be watching it, do you think?
I think I will, yeah. Just because I feel like I have to at this point. I don't know. Whenever like a series adaptation comes of a book, I'm always like, well, I have to watch it now at least so I can compare. Yeah. Like in my brain, I'm like, what's going to be better? But also I'm just like curious to watch it, I think.
So do you think you would recommend this book to anybody else? Like, how do you see it in the scale, in like the grand scheme of like books you have to read?
I would recommend it. I thought it was, I really liked the book. I thought it was a really good book. I guess it just depends on sort of what your preference is, because like I'm not always into like history based books, I guess. So it was not like I am glad I read it. I don't know if I would read it again, but I think it was a really good book. I do recommend it. I think that it was there was a lot that was offered in it. So yeah, I'd recommend it. Would you?
I think I'm the same way, where I'm like, it was a good book, and I think this series would be really good to watch with like a family. In the sense that, like, how everybody was watching like Queen's Gambit, right, or something like that. Like, it's that style of thing where everybody can really get into it, and it's intriguing and it hits sort of different notes for everyone. However, with the current climate right now, I'm not sure we are going to be watching war and bombings for fun. Yeah. So that is also something to consider, like, starting this book in like August versus finishing it now. It's like, before I'm like, okay, like I don't mind reading about this, but now I'm like, okay, there's so much of this happening now currently. It's not
the escape of a book that you're looking for. A little too real right now.
Well, I guess that's it from us. We only have one episode left of this season, and we're going to be wrapping up everything TIFF. We hope you've been enjoying this series as much as we have. Connect with us on Letterboxd at Uncultured Twenties 20s to see all the films we've covered, or you can go to our Spotify and see our playlists at Uncultured Twenties, spelled out TWENTIES.
We're also on Instagram, so follow us at Uncultured Twenties, TWENTIES. If you went to TIFF, let us know what you thought of the festival, what films did you love, and which did you maybe not like as much.
We are Uncultured Twenties, and we'll see you on the airwaves, just like Marie Lore.
Bye.
I will not be reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, though. Sorry, Jules Verne. Uncultured Twenties.